even in the places whose soul, who were created to protect Sri Aurobindo's work, that was the whole point of some of these institutions, he noticed that Ken Wilber's theories were more in use and more being adopted than the original Guru's work himself.
Like in Sanskrit we say, Ishwar is Vishwuttirn, it is beyond, transcendent, and also Vishwamaya, he is immanent also.
Exactly, right? That is why spiritual pursuit or the pursuit of Brahman and the pursuit of Ishvara is possible within the worldly setup. You don't have to give up the world. What Wilber does is he takes these elements, so he takes the phrase ascent and integrate of Sri Aurobindo's and makes it his own thing called transcend and include.
Transcendent?
Include. So you transcend the lower plane to a higher plane and you include whatever it is from the lower plane to the higher plane. I mean, this is literally what Sri Aurobindo says.
Namaste everyone, I am Anurag Sharma from Infinity Foundation, India. Today we are going to discuss this new book by Rajiv Malhotra, Manogna Sastry and Kundan Singh, The Battle for Consciousness Theory. And this book has been endorsed by Dr. Karan Singh also, and it was launched yesterday in Delhi. And I have with me the author of the book, Manogna Sastry, and we are going to discuss this. So let us start from the beginning. So before we discuss about Sri Aurobindo and his consciousness theory and how Ken Wilber is the person who has tried to appropriate, digest this whole consciousness theory, we should discuss what is this U-turn theory and also the digestion theory that Rajiv ji has given to us.
So I think as a fellow Infinity Foundation member, you know how game changing these paradigms have been. So there are three paradigms which we have used in this book. One is the digestion theory, the second is U-turn, and the third is the difference between integral and synthetic unity. Now, digestion theory, as Rajiv ji had put out many years ago, is the process where the core civilizational assets, and you can even think of it as intellectual property, of one civilization gets taken in by another civilization in a manner which further disempowers the source of civilization, right? So for instance, in some of our previous books, even in Sanskrit non-translatables, we have referred to the digestion theory and we have shown the consequences of that. And the typical analogy we use is that of a predator and a prey.
Okay.
Right? So when you have a predator attacking a prey, what it does is it takes all the useful elements from the prey as food for itself, discards what it doesn't want, cannibalizes the entire prey, and it disempowers it completely. So if we consider it in a civilizational exchange between, let's say, many Western civilizations, Abrahamic, Greco-Roman, and dharma-based civilizations such as ours, in a period of the last several years, in several centuries, right, 400, 500 years of exchange that we have had, India has been a source for many important theories, for many important ideas and theories for the West, and they have appropriated it, digested it into their own, while it has only done more weakening and lessening for us. So this is an important framework which we have used as the backdrop in our book, The Battle for Consciousness Theory. And while digestion is the process for institutions, schools of thought, and the larger cultural exchange, U-turn theory refers to the patterns of individuals.
Okay.
Right? How is it that the individuals are digesting the trail that they leave behind, the patterns which are a part of this appropriation is what we refer to as U-turn. So typically U-turn theory we postulate has 5 stages, right? The first stage is where the person, the outsider, it could be anybody from, let's say, the Western paradigm for simple information. So now when you have somebody from a different framework approach Indian civilization, initially it can be under very benign reasons. They can come and say, we are genuinely interested, we're genuinely curious about the Indian civilization because, it has so much to offer to the world. So this first stage is what we call discipleship. They come under, the exchange
all
of
the respect, and then they
exactly. They will seek out
knowledge.
they will seek out an expert, a subject matter expert, and they will want to exchange with them in good faith from both parties. The second stage is what we call decontextualization. So now in decontextualization, what happens? They take the core important, useful aspects which they want from any domain, and they generalize it. They universalize it, right? So for instance, if you take, maybe they can take some important insights from yoga, or they can take some important insights from Ayurveda. And then instead of using them in the same context in which they found, they decontextualize it by making it universal. So instead of, let's say, benefits of pranayama being discussed in context of yoga and pranayama, they will sort of remove it and say these are breathing techniques which are found everywhere in the world, right? So that is decontextualization. The third stage which we talked about is recontextualization, where the insights and the concepts which have been taken from the source civilization are now worked into the framework of the receiving civilization. So it becomes a part of their language, their aesthetics, their frameworks and all the technical structure which is there. And their structures are protected already because they've had now a history of being in power. So they will have IP protection, they will have trademarks, they will have schools of thought which constantly, they reference each other. One person refers to another Westerner, who refers to another Westerner, and they propagate theirs. So our core insights are taken and recontextualized into an alien sort of a framework. The fourth stage is what we call arson. So in this stage, what happens? They come back and make sure that there's no trace left. It's like an arsonist who robs the bank and then burns it down to leave no trail.
Correct.
So that is the fourth stage of a U-turn theory. And the fifth stage is what we have called the repackaging, where what has been taken from our source civilization, recontextualized in some other framework, is now exported back into India under a new framework. And because we've lost that entire history of how these ideas were taken away from us in the first place, we take these, repackaged, rebranded, sort of bootleg products, and we assume they are something that we need to take, right?
And we don't even know that it is our own thing that is coming back to us from some foreign source.
Exactly. So it's almost like, for instance, our source algorithms are taken and they are made as a part of some universal general shareware and put into a system where they have licenses and they have trademarks. And then we have to end up paying that license fare to them to be able to use something which was originally taken from us. So I think Western universalism becomes the larger umbrella under which Vedic insights, under which our dharmic insights get subsumed. So this pattern, which many individuals have done over the past, let's say, 400 to 500 years of being of this cultural exchange that we've had between the West and Bharata and other Eastern traditions, is what we call U-turn theory. So in this book, The Battle for Consciousness Theory, we map out Ken Wilber, who is the American theorist. We will discuss him as we go along. We map out Ken Wilber's journey into using Sri Aurobindo's work as a U-turn.
Okay, we will come to that, Manogna.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining this U-turn theory and also the digestion theory, because this is very essential to understand this book. Yeah. Now, next question would be, could you please elaborate how Rajiv ji began writing this book? Because I understand it has 25 years of research. Okay, so what were the beginnings of this book and how Rajiv ji had to struggle with Sri Aurobindo's followers? So can you please elaborate on that?
So, as you rightly pointed out, this book has a journey of 25 years right now, and we are so glad that it is at least finally out. So, in the initial part one of this book, right, we outline Rajiv ji's entire journey into this. So, in the late 1990s, Rajiv ji and under him Infinity Foundation was sponsoring a lot of projects, including village development programs in Auroville, as well as the surrounding areas. So Rajiv ji used to make a lot of trips. He spent a lot of time over there, and it was during these kind of visits and exchanges he noticed even in the places whose soul who were created to protect Sri Aurobindo's work. That was the whole point of some of these institutions. He noticed that Ken Wilber's theories were more in use and more being adopted than the original Guru's work himself. And this was very alarming for Rajiv ji. It was very shocking and very alarming. And he tried to raise this issue with many Aurobindonians, many Aurobindo followers, and the forums which were there discussing Sri Aurobindo's work. Because we see, Sri Aurobindo has been a hugely popular global influence, right? On one hand, we have many of his followers within India. At the same time, because his spiritual collaborator, the mother, because she was from France, there are a lot of Aurobindo centers and influence study groups. It could be a lot of such smaller places, even in France, even in other parts of Europe. In US, for instance, there are institutions, including California Institute of Integral Studies, which were all started by Sri Aurobindo followers, right, in the 50s, to take the message of Sri Aurobindo from India to these countries authentically, not to distort, not to do anything, but to propagate it authentically. So Rajiv ji started having discussions on all these forums, started talking with these people and saying, listen, there is this thing happening, right? All of Sri Aurobindo's work is actually being appropriated by Ken Wilber, and he's studying it, and much of it has been incorporated into his own integral theory. And he found the response to be pretty lukewarm. And in fact, he had support only from three major people. Two of them, of course, were KD Joshi ji and KD Sethna ji. KD Sethna was actually a disciple of Sri Aurobindo. And KD Joshi ji, he had a prominent role. He was a very important Aurobindonian in the movement for so long. And the third important voice who came out in support for Rajiv ji was the ex-president of Singapore, the late Devan Nair ji, right, who stood up for Rajiv ji on many of these forums and said, what you're doing is very important work. And those who are, ignoring this whole thing, he called them the navel-gazing Aurobindonians.
He uses this term in the book.
Exactly. So in fact, we call part one as the navel-gazing Aurobindonians as a tribute to actually Devan Nair ji. So this was the situation, and in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And by then, in fact, Wilber had become so strong that he even wanted to patent the term integral psychology. Can you imagine how dire the situation was? Integral psychology, in fact, there are books written by Sri Aurobindo followers, such as one Indra Sen, late Indra Sen, who had used Sri Aurobindo's methodology to provide insights into psychology of man, and it was called the integral psychology. So imagine some foreigner is sitting and even patenting the term, and many followers of Sri Aurobindo and the Aurobindonians in the places who were supposed to protect his work were comfortable just joining Wilber's movement as a smaller branch and surrendering important intellectual property. So this was the very alarming situation and the backdrop which forms, the story for this book. And that is when Rajiv ji decided that he would have to undertake the research himself. Because Wilber has been a prolific author. He's been writing since the 1970s. So in response, standing up for the true Aurobindonian movement meant that somebody had to go through all of Wilber's work, somebody had to go through all of Aurobindo's work, from the Vedic viewpoint as well, and put out a counter. Show how this entire, map it out, one-on-one mapping and show it out. And that was the task that needed to be done, which honestly the Aurobindoan movement had to have done, but a comprehensive pushback was very much needed. And that is when Rajivji decided to do it himself, along with the co-authors Kundan Singh. Kundan Singh also has a huge background as an Aurobindonian, and he got involved into this project to help map it out. And then after a while it was I who got involved, and all three of us, went through the drafts several times, redid it, and we had to map out the entire trail. And that is the origins of this book.
Thank you, Manogna. It's very shocking to hear that Sri Aurobindo's followers were aiding in the digestion process instead of resisting it.
Exactly.
And Rajiv ji had to counter that.
Exactly.
So that's.
In fact, you must also be familiar with this, right? Because we've mapped this with some of the other in some of our other books as well. Every time we point out this digestion and U-turn paradigms, there is pushback in the sense. Many people think, why should we do this? In the sense, isn't it a good thing? Isn't it a good thing that somebody else is adopting our insights? Or isn't all of this a global knowledge? Why is it, maybe this is something common to every culture?
So my next question would be related to that you discuss, what is this perennialism, that the term that is being used, and how does it connect with what you are talking right now? That everything is the same, the sameness kind of, way of looking at the world.
So perennialism is the idea that the insights and experiences of mystics, right? Mystics and practitioners. In our civilization, we can call them as maybe yogis and rishis who conduct the experiments themselves on their own body. It's actually far more profound than just mere scientifically explaining it. So in perennialism, it believes that the insights that you get out of mystics is universal. It is common to all mystics. For instance, if you were to have a mystic from, let's say, maybe some esoteric tradition in Christianity or in Judaism or Islam or any of the other, Western cultures, imagine saying that the insights you get out of that is the same, basically, universal, with any insights from a yogi who has been practicing it. So that is, this use of perennialism as a framework has been very useful for scholars such as Wilber.
Did this perennialism exist before Wilber, or is it something he coined?
It has existed even before Wilber. Okay. So that is the important point. So there have been many Western scholars, right, including, and we trace it out very extensively in this book. Sri Ramanujacharya's insights have been used by many Westerners and passed off without any attribution, because you can perennialize them, you can generalize them, right? And the typical U-turn pattern, similar to what we mentioned earlier, is that they take insights, you perennialize them, and you turn back and say the scholars themselves, you represent them as being perennialists. For instance, in Sri Aurobindo's case, Sri Aurobindo was especially not a perennialist. If we read his words, he was very clear in identifying what is the unique viewpoint of each culture. Right? Because when you don't accept that there are differences, when you try to just brush everything with the stroke of sameness, it becomes very easy to digest. That's what we talk about even in Sanskrit non-translatables. When you don't use the original Sanskritam padam from the language in the context as is, you set it up for digestion. That is where Atma can become, soul or spirit, or some of our key insights from pranayama or any of our practices, right? Our acharas, our what we call sadhana can be coined as some ritual. Ritual is very different from what we just mean. It's not some empty thing.
It's just a mechanical thing.
So perennialism is an umbrella under which digestion can be facilitated. And in this case, it is a big disservice and wrong to characterize Sri Aurobindo as a perennialist.
And this is what Ken Wilber does.
Yes. Okay. And we show and we push back and say Sri Aurobindo has refused that characterization explicitly. I mean, it is very clear in his words. Sri Aurobindo had a very interesting background for his time. Born in India, but he had his very important period of education in the UK, right? He was very familiar with the Greek, he was familiar with French, he was familiar very intimately with the Western thought process. And then he came back to India, and through his history, we know he immersed himself into the Sanskrit language, into Vedas, Vedantas. So the man had the fantastic combination of being exposed very well intimately with the Western frameworks as well as with the Eastern frameworks. But that is his uniqueness. He recognized what is the Western strain, what is the Indian Eastern strain, and respected both. You don't have to say them as same. You can respect the kind of materialistic progress that the West has brought, its use of rationality. They are very important contributions. You shouldn't say this is perennial to everybody, right? That's not right. Similarly, he respected what even the Eastern tradition insights were for themselves. And when he put forth his integral yoga, his Purna yoga, he is very clear in respecting and attributing each of these to the cultures. So to call them as perennialist is actually a mischaracterization of Sri Aurobindo's work. And it is these kind of things which should have been caught up by the Aurobindonian movement and pushed back, right? Because somebody is distorting your guru's work. So you have to, track it and push back.
So he basically, like Rajiv ji says, mutual respect. So exactly. It was like he respected their tradition, but that doesn't mean he wanted to say that both are the same.
Yeah.
So you can respect a distinct kind of culture also. But that doesn't mean you're saying that it is the same as my own culture or my own ideas.
Exactly. And hence I can take whatever their key insights are and I can say this is perennial.
Yeah, because this was already a part of our culture because it's all the same.
Correct.
So this is like helps in digesting the other civilizations.
Exactly.
Especially the one which is not that powerful.
Which is not compatible. Right? Which is
and not dominant also, because the dominant one will try to digest the less dominant one.
Exactly. Which in fact, leads us to the third framework which we've used even in Sanskrit non-translatables, the integral versus synthetic. So in the dharmic cultures, there is integral unity, right? And we have put forth already so many times, what is integral unity? Integral unity is something where inherently there is a seamless unity between all the individual parts, right? For instance, if we were to take a plant.
Yes, we have a plant over there.
Exactly. So the leaves, the soil, the sunlight it uses, the seed out of which it comes, they are all seamlessly connected, right, as a whole. In contrast with something that you manufacture, like your phone.
Correct.
Right? In your phone, you have individual components which have been manufactured separately and they can be assembled together. So that is the example of a synthetic unity. So in Rajivji's work, he has characterized the dharma civilizations as being inherently, intrinsically unified. So there is integral unity in them. In the non-dharmic civilizations, they have been characterized as having synthetic unity. So there, there are parts which have been developed historically over time and so on, but they are not. They don't have a Vedic framework like the way the Eastern dharma-based traditions have. So now when you take somebody like a Wilber, American theorist, when he uses a synthetic framework, synthetic viewpoint and lens to dissect and start analyzing an integrally unified system such as, the Vedic and Sri Aurobindo framework, you're going to produce distortions. It is inevitable. Right? Because he sees it as, okay, I get some insight out of this, I'm going to take this and put it in and make it a part of the Western framework. And then he realizes, this is something we show in the book, he realizes 10 years or 15 years down the line that there are issues coming up because it doesn't belong over there. So then he realizes there are issues coming up, he attributes the issues to Sri Aurobindo's wrong understanding. Okay, that is a huge grave error. So the wrong things are attributed to Sri Aurobindo's understanding, and then he goes back and he reads and he takes, potential corrections and passes it off as his own work 5 years later. This has been happening. This has been happening from phase 1 of Wilber's work until, even the recent ones. And that is why this framework becomes important for us. When we are putting forth our Aurobindonian viewpoint, right? We situate Sri Aurobindo in the larger Vedic framework as he himself had for his work.
Basically, he is trying to essentially pick up a framework that is integral, unified kind of framework, and he's trying to fit in with his own synthetic, unified kind of framework.
Correct.
So that is the problem.
Exactly, that is a problem. And this lens of that we are using is our own. See, because in this book, we not only do a Purvapaksha of Wilber's work, we are also putting forth our response. And this framework is a part of our response. It is our drishti, in analyzing Wilber's work and saying this is not going to work. No wonder there are errors popping up
of course,
in some of his
there
phases.
would be errors.
Yes. So Wilber 1 initially, so there are 5 phases to Wilber's work, and these are phases he has self-defined, right, from his earliest work in the 1970s. So initially he comes across as being, just benign, just trying to look at the Eastern wisdom insights and trying to bring these insights for the Western audience. So he's like a compiler, right? He's trying to compile what's the best of West, what is the best of East, what can I take and put over here. Then in the next phases, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, you start seeing the effects of it. And perennialism is one important, umbrella, like a larger umbrella he uses in the initial phases to first take elements from Indian culture, from Aurobindo's work and put it in there. And secondly, distort Sri Aurobindo himself as a perennialist. We push back against that.
Okay, thank you Manogna for that elaborate answer. That was very interesting. Now, Ken Wilber also accuses Indians in general and also Sri Aurobindo of otherworldliness, and Indians are world negating. So, how do we counter these kind of accusations in this book?
That's a very important, very, very important point. So, Wilber's work, right, when you look at phases 2, 3, and even it goes until 4, there are some key concepts that he has appropriated, which rework into West's long-standing accusation against India of India just being focused on otherworldly issues and not being concerned with this worldly elements. So I think I can focus on 2 aspects which lead to this accusation. The first one is there's a very important, very uniquely Indian insight, which is there is harmony between what we call transcendence and what we call immanence, right? Now, what is it that we mean when we say transcendent? So the alpha and omega, as Sri Aurobindo puts it, of the Indian Bharatiya, philosophical thinking, if I can even, I don't even want to use the word philosophy, but the highest summum bonum, as he calls it, is that Brahman, is the concept of the Brahman, right? Now, you are very familiar with this. In fact, you should definitely add to this. But the Brahman has been studied under various darshanas, right? And the Brahman being Sat, Chit, Ananda. It has it is Sat, it is Chit, it is this Chit which leads to Chetana. So Chit is consciousness, and Ananda, which is bliss, right? So having these aspects of Brahman, the Brahman being Satchidananda, is explored to great detail in different strains. It could be Advaita Vedanta, it could be other Visishtadvaita, it could be Dvaita, or it could be even other darshanas. It could be through yoga, through the lens of Nyaya, it could be any of these. Because of the multiplicity that we have of paths of approaching this Brahman, we have so many beautifully unique methods, but they're all integrally unified, right? Because they all are under the Vedic framework. Now, this Brahman is the very beginning. The Indian viewpoint is that he is the beginning and he is the final end. Now, how this Brahman manifests and grows through the cycle of, manifesting in the world, that is what we call as immanence, right? So when we say something is immanent, we mean that the world we are a part of, ourselves, all of it itself is the Brahman, right? This is in contrast to the Western civilization, where you have God and you have creation. God is outside creation.
Creator
right?
is different from the
Exactly.
created.
So God created his entire, what we call as the creation, and there is exploration of how to reach God, and they have their own unique understandings and frameworks and paradigms. This is very different from our situation, where the Ishavasya Upanishad itself, the first line itself, right? Ishavasyamidam sarvam, and the second part of the verse, both of those verses set the first principles, one can say, of immanence. This world itself is pervaded by the Brahman.
Like in Sanskrit we say, Ishwar is Vishwottirn, it is beyond, transcendent, and also Vishwamaya, he is immanent also.
Exactly, right? That is why spiritual pursuit or the pursuit of Brahman and the pursuit of Ishvara is possible within the worldly setup. You don't have to give up the world. You don't have to, reject being a part of this world to, find God and to reach God. So this beautiful immanence and transcendence relationship, it was put forth in very beautifully by first Swami Vivekananda for the Western audience. See, this has always been a part of our culture, but Swami Vivekananda, during his tour of the US and Western worlds, he put forth in the English language these very important insights. What Swami Vivekananda put forth, Sri Aurobindo built upon that, and this has been a core tenet of Indian.
In all the traditions. In fact, we have this concept of Jeevan Mukti,
Exactly.
living liberation or embodied liberation, which means that you are liberated while you are in this physical body.
Exactly.
So even the Advaita Vedanta tradition, which has been, I think, more accused of these kind of things, even they have this concept of Jeevan Mukti, and they say that you can be liberated while embodied. And then the Jeevan Mukt, or a living liberated person, has the duty to give that jnana, the knowledge, to those people who don't have it. So it's not world negating at all.
Exactly. So now imagine, firstly you have taken this core principle and put it into a system which does not have this, which was fundamentally the Judeo-Christian framework. The Abrahamic framework believes in God being outside creation, right? So now you have taken this concept and you've tried to take the insights from it and pass it off as your own. Secondly, what has happened is, you as you rightly mentioned, certain interpretations of Advaita Vedanta are taken, critiqued, analyzed through a wrong lens, and because some of that may be otherworldly, you say everything in Indian philosophy is otherworldly. This is a huge mischaracterization. I mean, we are the land of the Gita. We are the land of, where Bhagavan himself is urging action on the battlefield.
Correct.
So it is a very huge mischaracterization in putting it as, otherworldly and
Renunciation is always inner, it's not outer. Inner renunciation is important.
that inner renunciation is what Sri Aurobindo puts forth. He says there needs to be, when you're pursuing the transcendent, you're not renouncing externally just the world. That's not what it means. What is meaning is there is an inner renunciation of the ego driving this whole process, and instead you surrender more and more for the divine grace to take over your yoga, right? So that inner renunciation is what Sri Aurobindo and before him even Swami Vivekananda were talking about. They interpret it, that way. So this whole key concept has been taken by Wilber, appropriated. And then gone ahead, typical U-turner, he has mischaracterized Indian philosophy as otherworldly. And I will show even further in his next phases what he means by putting India as otherworldly. And instead what he does, he takes these important concepts to solve an actual Western problem. In fact, the West has been dealing from the times of the Greeks. They have been struggling with this dichotomy between matter and spirit, right? West is riddled with dichotomies. They have issues with science and religion, or science and God. One of the other dichotomies is matter and spirit. They see an opposition between matter and spirit. This is not our opposition to begin with. It's not our problem. It's a purely Western problem. Now, there have been debates launched in Western lineages who have tried to address this issue and move on. So now Wilber positions himself to be the latest in the Western lineage by taking insights from the Vedic framework, from Sri Aurobindo's material, to solve certain Western problems. But he doesn't attribute it to Sri Aurobindo. This is a huge thing. Imagine you're taking the solution from a different framework, accusing the person of having a problem which is actually yours to begin with, which is a huge, huge thing. And we flagged this entirely, right? So this issue, this otherworldly characterization of Sri Aurobindo and the larger Vedic framework, so it happens in different stages in Wilber's words. And on one hand, he takes this particular concept of immanence and transcendence. Then as we move further in Wilber's phases, he has something known as the AQAL. That is the all.
Yes, I was coming to that. So,
yes.
Yeah, so before we go that, we can discuss one more thing and then we can come to the AQAL model.
Absolutely.
So this is Wilber has also appropriated this theory of involution and evolution.
Correct.
So can you explain how he has appropriated it and also distorted it? And he also says that this is something he came up with. This was not a part of the Indian tradition, but I think this has been a part of the Indian knowledge ever since the time of the Upanishads.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So can you please throw some light on this?
So the 18th and 19th centuries, right, have been interesting for the Western discourse because of the debates surrounding evolution, right? Today we take it for granted that West has been championing so many important material discoveries and scientific discoveries, but they actually believed in flat earth models. Evolution was a hard concept for them to actually wrap their minds around. They believe the debates between creationism and evolution have been a part of their...
They also used to believe that sky will fall on their head. So this was like...
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So it was actually during these interesting periods of the debates that were going on that Swami Vivekananda put forth the Indian viewpoint, right? During his travels and his tours in the Western world, UK, US, everywhere, it was he who started putting out the Indian viewpoint that for something to evolve, the question is what evolves? What is it that is evolving? So, and that is where the Indian concept of involution is very, very key. So in the Indian framework, involution and evolution are twin processes. Something is evolving because there is something already involuted into that. From the lowest forms of matter, and then what Sri Aurobindo calls life, and then even the mind, right? Which he calls as, based on the planes of consciousness in each of them. This evolution from matter to different forms of life, to the mind as we know of today, right? We typically tend to think of the brain. There's the triune model of the brain, right? You think of the reptilian and you think of the mammalian as well as you think of the neocortex. So each of these are marked as certain evolutionary jumps in the way the brain has evolved, for instance. So but the fundamental question remains, what is evolving? So in the Indian, viewpoint, it is believed that because you have the Brahman, because you have the highest consciousness already involuted in matter, life and the mind, it is that which is evolving. And it evolves in multiple forms because there is multiplicity inherently present when the process of evolution is, when you have manifestation in all these planes. So this concept, what Swami Vivekananda initially championed, was also further taken to the next steps by Sri Aurobindo as a part of his Purna Yoga, integral yoga, right? So he brought all these wonderful insights from Vedanta and Upanishads, and then he used the language, modern language, so successfully to lay out the path of what is involution-evolution for the individual, for the collective consciousness. All of this he brought together in his integral yoga. This has been taken in by Ken Wilber, including the planes of consciousness, including certain particular aspects, like there is some differentiating lines, there is some differentiating planes. All of these individual certain parts have been taken by Wilber and used. And that is when, in fact, it marks a jump, which even I think which the co-author Kundan also spoke about yesterday when we had the launch. The Wilber goes from being a typal Wilber to being an evolutionary Wilber. That is, he's taken the entire model of Sri Aurobindo's evolution, and he goes ahead. The Wilber's appropriation of this involution and evolution, I think, is a huge red flag. And this book addresses it in great detail. See, one of the important things we have done for the reader in this book, we have put out a lot of tables, right? We have put out what is it from Wilber's work, what is the original from Sri Aurobindo's work. People can do a side-to-side comparison and see how the whole theory has been evolved. And there is an interesting pattern to Wilber's scholarship. We highlight that as well over here in the book. When he initially puts something in one phase of his work, he doesn't acknowledge the source. Then in a few phases down the line, when any issues prop up, or when somebody points out any error, that there is this flawed understanding over here, or when he has to project himself as the expert in some other sub topic, then he will use Sri Aurobindo's name to prop himself up. That, okay, Sri Aurobindo said this and this is thing. Then, so initially in phase 2, he doesn't refer to Sri Aurobindo's work, when actually he needed to attribute it in a professional and scholarly manner. In phase 4, when somebody questions him, he uses Sri Aurobindo's name as the authority figure under which he says, yes, this man has said this is this. So this kind of a pattern detecting has taken, a huge, you have to read the whole material, track it down and put it out. And this is something that the Aurobindonian movement should have done back in 2000s itself for the Guru's work. And related to this involution-evolution, right, I think is another topic which you would also ask me about.
Yes, I would like to know this topic, this concept of ascent and integrate.
Correct.
So what is it?
So Sri Aurobindo, when he put forth his model of consciousness, right, there are varying degrees of how consciousness manifests, and each of these are considered as sort of planes, right? And they are planes through which any sadhaka or anybody who is interested in this, you do sadhana as a part of your journey to grow higher up into these planes. And when you grow higher up into these planes, more faculties of yours are developed. There is finer tuning. And we're familiar with this, especially from the Vedic framework, right? You move from the gross to the subtle, and you're becoming more perceptive as you go higher up and do more sadhana and so on. Now, when you go from one lower plane to a higher plane, it does not mean that you suddenly abandon anything that you had from the lower plane. Sri Aurobindo very clearly lays out that when you ascend to a higher plane, you include, right, and you take all the purified aspects of the lower plane, integrate it as a part of the person transcending, and you go to the higher plane. So, for instance, in Vedic tradition as well as even in Sri Aurobindo's words, it is very clear. So that when you go from being, let's say, from the rational plane to the higher plane, it doesn't mean you become irrational and stupid. It just means rationality is no longer a limiting factor for you. You're able to sense and you're able to, integrate from your indriyas inputs which are maybe supra-rational. They may be something that you don't just get only from a rational or
it's not irrational, it's supra-rational.
It is supra-rational. So that is an ascend. So you ascend, but you integrate all the purified elements from the lower plane when you go to the higher plane. And you can act on the problems in the lower plane from the higher plane. This is a very clearly laid out path in the path of yoga of Sri Aurobindo, the integral yoga. What Wilber does is he takes these elements, so he takes the phrase ascent and integrate of Sri Aurobindo's and makes it his own thing called transcend and include.
Transcendent?
Include. So you transcend the lower plane to a higher plane and you include whatever it is from the lower plane to the higher plane. I mean, this is literally what Sri Aurobindo says, right? Which is the surprising, which is what, where the scholarship part of it is what we question, where we question Wilber's scholarship. There already exists a framework where everything has been laid out. Why not give Sri Aurobindo the due respect and regard you would give any other Western scholar and use his work as is and cite it? That is all that we are asking for. What is the need? I mean, the fact that there is this, taking of all his insights, passing it off and reformulating as your own integral framework, and then saying you have superseded even Sri Aurobindo. Wilber and his followers maintain he has superseded even Sri Aurobindo. He is called as the Einstein of consciousness theory.
Okay.
So that is a pattern of scholarship which needs to be absolutely flat. And that is what we have done. We show exactly the phrases from Sri Aurobindo's work, we show the equivalent from Wilber's work, and we put it out.
Great. Yeah, it should definitely be challenged. That's correct. Now, you mentioned in this book about other digesters also, like
Yes.
Wilber. So,
Yes.
can you please elaborate on who these people were?
So, because we position this book as one where Sri Aurobindo's work and the larger Vedic framework has got subsumed under Western universalism, we clearly trace how Wilber, when he's taking the insights from the Eastern tradition in Sri Aurobindo, but he attributes the credit to somebody else, right? Arthur Koestler, Charles Hartshorne, or anybody, he within the Western schools of thought, he attributes it to them. So what we have done is, even Wilber's Western sources, we have drawn, examined, seen if any of them have in turn, has there been any exchange. Right?
Even before Wilber, this thing might have been happening.
Exactly, because this kind of an exchange has been happening for centuries now, where Indian thought has been used as the source, extracted, and because as we discussed earlier, there's a pattern in the U-turn process where you come back and eliminate the trail, right? You are repackaging everything, the insights, into your own tradition, that you have removed the context from which they actually were there in the Indian tradition. So because that has happened, it becomes even more important that Wilber is the latest, but there are previous people even earlier in the Western lineage whose work needed to be examined, and we have done that very systematically in this book.
Now, can you also briefly, you talk about the AQAL model in this book. So, can you briefly explain to our audience what is this AQAL model of Wilber?
Okay. So, Wilber has taken his evolutionary paradigm and the concepts of holons, the concepts, these may come across as technical terms, and that's why I think it's very important people read the book, because we locate it, we situate it in context. So he's taken all of that from Sri Aurobindo's model, we show that. Now, AQAL stands for all quadrant, all levels, right? What it means is that it's a very simple system. Wilber has come up with a quadrant model. There are just, 4 quadrants where he's trying to represent the, individual and collective, interior and exterior aspects of man into a quadrant, right? So there could be in individual interior, there could be individual exterior, there could be collective interior, there could be collective exterior, there could be all of these. So using this grid system, what he wants to do is organize all of man's activities, whether it is his spiritual, physical, mental, social, economic. How can we organize and represent these activities in a quadrant model? That is what he has done through his AQAL, right? Now, the sad part is, as he has progressed through his phases in Ram, he has put, now for each quadrant, right, the theories for each quadrant emerge from all his great explorations across the spectrum, Western, Eastern, whatever he finds. He uses almost 12 schools of thought, he uses, 12 different paradigms. So he says he's taken all the world systems that are there, which concern the theories and the systems which are concerned with each aspects of these, and he's used them for different quadrants. Now, having built his entire, several decades old work on Sri Aurobindo's model and the Indian Vedic framework, he takes this entire thing and puts it only in one quadrant of the entire system, so which is the interior individual. So basically what he has done, he has shown that the Indian systems are good enough only for interior individual. That means for individual practices of a man, such as maybe spirituality. So imagine, this is an entirely parallel system. We have done so much work. Think about it. As a civilization, what we have put out in astronomy, mathematics, architecture, metallurgy.
And he uses this to accuse us of world-negation and otherworldliness.
So you have a system here. So it perpetuates that feeling, it perpetuates the thought that Indians are only concerned with otherworldly spiritual practices, which is a huge disservice. Because, it's very clear, we have done everything. There is a reason why the Western world came in search of India, because of its material wealth. As much as its spiritual treasures, it was also just sheer material wealth. All of this did not come from simply sitting in some, cave and just randomly ignoring the world. This came because we had systems for it. We have shastras for it. We have, so many vidyas pursuing all of these.
In fact, Infinity Foundation has a 14-volume series, series, which talks about the Indian engineering and tradition that we had in the past.
Exactly. And it also is very important because Indian systems have their own parallels even to address the psychology of man. It's so sad that it's not taught in our education system, because forget the West, we have an entire parallel system of understanding the inner workings of man. With the Sankhya system, right, you break it down, understanding the gunas, the koshas, and then how the manas is, how the buddhi is. We have very clearly laid out map, very discriminatory between, it discriminates between what is a thought and a feeling. What are the centers in the body where these are processed, right? So you have a whole parallel model to even address psychological issues, right? When we have a yoga, for instance, when you do a yoga is not just some, just in the pursuit of course, that is the basis.
Sitting in some posture and,
and just doing pranayama or doing one asana here and there. The whole purpose of yoga is to create an absolutely strong adhara to be able to hold the spiritual ascent that you're doing. You want a very, very strong adhara. The ego there is not some, ego-driven thing, but it's the aham, right? It's not. The ahankara there is not some negative. You're trying to remove all the rajasic and tamasic tendencies.
You have to quieten your mind. Yogas chitta vritti nirodha. So you have to quieten your mind. That's the only thing. It doesn't mean you have to negate everything, and you have to still live in this world only.
Absolutely. You want to create a strong sattvic adhara who is able to, do service in the world, to take on the world, and to be a useful instrument of the divine. So this is the fundamental we are very this worldly. There is nothing otherworldly.
In fact, in the Sankhya Yoga tradition, Prakriti is real. No, they don't even say it is, mithya and all. They don't use these terms.
Yes. And of course, our Shastras, we have so many. You want in economics, you want in Rajadharma, you have in Dharma Shastras. Imagine taking a whole parallel system like this, taking the insights from them and just putting it in some interior individual corner of an quadrant model. And because Wilber has become so famous and because his model is so ubiquitous, we even have institutes in India which use the quadrant model as a tool of analysis, not realizing that it is actually an output of the Indian systems itself. The quadrant model is hugely popular. Management colleges use it. Everybody, many people use it as a quick tool of analysis. Not only quick, but as an insightful tool for analysis. Not realizing that actually the basis for that is Indian systems itself and Sri Aurobindo's work in particular. So this is something that we have mapped and we've showed out, and it also lays out why it is very important for every even average Indian to read this book. Yes. This is not meant only for a particular Aurobindonian, or it is not meant only for that. This book is important for anybody who wants to understand how Western universalism has become an umbrella under which, core intellectual property of, Vedic frameworks and Vedic paradigms, and especially Sri Aurobindo's model, have just got taken. Many students will find it very useful, especially students of psychology, especially, those who are curious about these matters. They will find this book very, very
important. And they will perhaps be able to find patterns like this in some other Western thinkers' work.
Exactly.
That could be the case because this has been happening for centuries, as you mentioned.
Yes. So the patterns which we see in Wilber and Sri Aurobindo's this particular interaction and engagement, you're absolutely right. These patterns, people can say, do they exist in other people's work, right? And this is something that we have to do as a part of our own decolonizing process, right? Now that you have a certain distance, you have at least political freedom to go back and see how our frameworks have served as a source for mining for the West. I think this book will provide a useful framework for all of these.
Thank you, Manogna, for this wonderful insight. It was very, very interesting. And this is the book. So I recommend everyone to read this book. It's available on Amazon and also on the Infinity Foundation website. So it's a must read for everyone.